Breaking news in the mystery of the passenger plane that vanished into thin air. U.S. investigators tell ABC News they are considering the possibility based on new clues.
For over a decade, Malaysian Airlines Flight MH370 remained one of the most baffling and tragic mysteries in aviation history. The aircraft vanished on March 8, 2014, en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, carrying 239 people. Despite immense international search efforts, numerous conspiracy theories, and ongoing speculation, no conclusive answer had ever emerged until now. In 2025, after more than 11 years of lingering questions, doubt, and hope, scientists and aviation experts finally solved the mystery, revealing a story that stunned the world with its complexity, precision, and profound implications for the future of air travel. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The breakthrough came as part of a renewed joint effort involving satellite technology companies, international aviation bodies, and deep-sea exploration specialists. What set this investigation apart from prior attempts was a revolutionary leap in ocean floor mapping capabilities. Using a newly developed autonomous underwater vehicle AUV with deep learning algorithms that could identify metallic debris fields more effectively than ever before. This new generation of technology allowed for the comprehensive scanning of previously inaccessible and overlooked regions of the southern Indian Ocean, areas once dismissed due to lack of data or misinterpretation of early satellite pings. The key turning point occurred when the AUV detected an anomaly in one of the more remote sections of the Southern Search Corridor. Unlike the false positives of years past, this time the readings matched precisely what would be expected of a wide, scattered debris field from a high-velocity ocean impact. Over a period of several weeks, the AUV conducted systematic dives, gathering visual and sonar data. Eventually, large fragments of the fuselage, engine components, and even personal items from passengers were recovered. Most crucially, the flight data recorder, the black box, was retrieved from the silty ocean floor, miraculously intact despite the immense pressures and passage of time. When the black box was analyzed, the final moments of MH370 were pieced together with remarkable clarity. The flight had, in fact, followed an unexpected path, one that aligned with suspicions from some early radar traces, yet had long been deemed unlikely due to its seemingly illogical nature. After initial communication with Malaysian Air Traffic Control, the aircraft made a sudden and deliberate westward turn. Subsequent navigational shifts were then carried out manually, not by autopilot, indicating active decision-making by someone in the cockpit. Data from the cockpit voice recorder, while limited due to the time gap between communications and the flight's final hours, confirmed that there had been a calculated series of actions taken to reroute and ultimately ditch the aircraft in a remote area of the ocean. The last recorded flight path showed a slow descent, consistent with a controlled glide rather than a sudden plunge, strong evidence that this was not a catastrophic mechanical failure or uncontrolled crash. All indicators pointed toward a deliberate act, not a technical anomaly. This discovery eliminated numerous alternative theories that had circulated for years, from hypoxia due to cabin depressurization, to accidental shoot-downs, to bizarre notions of alien abduction or secret landings. With the confirmed flight path and cockpit data, scientists were able to determine that the aircraft was flown for several hours after losing radar contact, eventually running out of fuel and descending in a controlled fashion. The impact area had been just outside the primary search grids established early in the investigation, so agonizingly close, yet invisible to past technology. The implications of the discovery went far beyond satisfying a global curiosity or bringing long-awaited answers to grieving families. It marked a new era in the potential for recovery and investigation of lost aircraft, especially in oceanic environments. The success of this mission demonstrated that persistent data, when combined with technological innovation and international collaboration, could finally unravel even the most elusive of modern mysteries. For the aviation industry, the lessons were profound. First and foremost was the reevaluation of real-time aircraft tracking. Though steps had already been taken post-2014 to improve this capability, the discovery of MH370's true path highlighted the gaps that still existed in global coverage. There was now a renewed urgency to implement universal always-on satellite tracking systems that could monitor commercial aircraft regardless of geographic location. This would ensure that no plane could ever simply vanish again without a trace. Furthermore, there were discussions surrounding cockpit protocols and mental health evaluations for flight crew. The discovery lent considerable weight to the theory that the deviation in MH370's course was intentional, renewing debates about the psychological assessment of pilots and the safeguards needed to prevent unauthorized course alterations. While no explicit motive was confirmed through the recovered data, the pattern of movement, the disabling of transponders, and manual navigation decisions formed a picture of calculated control. Airline training procedures also came under scrutiny. Investigators and policymakers began to assess how current systems could be modified to detect and respond to abnormal flight behavior more rapidly. Could machine learning systems within aircraft monitoring infrastructure identify erratic flight paths early enough to allow for intervention? Could more robust cockpit surveillance offer early warnings without infringing on privacy? These were the questions driving a new wave of regulatory development. On the scientific front, the successful location and retrieval of MH370's wreckage demonstrated the growing power of deep-sea exploration. The collaboration between oceanographers, engineers, and AI researchers resulted in a level of precision and efficiency never before seen in such missions. The ability to map massive swaths of ocean floor and identify potential man-made objects with high confidence meant that search and rescue operations, whether for aircraft, shipwrecks, or lost cargo, could now be approached with entirely new optimism. The ocean, often referred to as the planet's last great frontier, seemed a little less unknowable. The discovery also had a ripple effect across geopolitical and diplomatic lines. In the years since the disappearance, tensions had occasionally flared between nations involved in the investigation, particularly over data sharing and search funding responsibilities. The successful conclusion to the MH370 mystery, facilitated by open collaboration and pooled resources, acted as a case study in how international unity in the face of tragedy could yield real results. Agencies that once guarded their radar or satellite data began to discuss protocols for broader information access in future incidents, recognizing that the price of secrecy could be measured in prolonged grief and unanswered questions. Perhaps one of the most powerful outcomes of the 2025 breakthrough was the psychological closure it offered. While the aftermath and mourning continued for those who lost loved ones, the clarity brought by factual resolution eased a deep wound that had remained raw for more than a decade. The unknown is often far more torturous than the truth, and the confirmation of what happened, however painful, was a balm to the uncertainty that had haunted families, friends, and the world at large. The public response was immense. News outlets around the globe dedicated entire days to covering the revelation, dissecting the flight data, mapping the final route, and honoring the passengers and crew who perished. Virtual simulations were created to demonstrate the last hours of the flight based on the newly acquired black box data. Historians and analysts began to chronicle the event not just as a tragedy, but as a turning point in the way humanity approaches uncertainty, perseverance, and technology-driven discovery. In education and training centers, the MH370 case became a foundational study, much like the lessons drawn from Titanic or Apollo 13. It demonstrated how gaps in systems, once exposed, could drive innovation. It reminded the world that while technology can fail, it can also evolve, becoming the very tool that corrects the mistakes of the past. The 2025 resolution of MH370's fate also served as a stark reminder of the immense and sometimes unpredictable complexity of modern aviation. Even with the most advanced aircraft and highly trained crews, human systems are fallible. But the very complexity that can lead to confusion and delay is also the source of relentless progress. Every sensor, satellite, and subsea robot used in the final search effort was the result of countless layers of scientific advancement and global cooperation. For those who had watched the search over the years, aviation enthusiasts, scientists, and ordinary citizens alike, the conclusion to MH370's story offered an emotional convergence of relief, sadness, and awe. It was a narrative that stretched across oceans, cultures, and generations, pulling together threads of technology, psychology, geopolitics, and humanity itself. With the chapter of MH370 now written, the world turned its attention toward preventing the next great aviation mystery. But in doing so, it did not forget the lives that were lost, nor the lesson etched into the ocean floor. That truth, no matter how deep it may be buried, can be found if humanity refuses to stop searching. The discovery of Flight MH370 in 2025 didn't just close a chapter. It fundamentally rewrote the book on how the world interprets disappearance, data, and human accountability in modern aviation. As the final telemetry logs, voice recordings, and wreckage details were pieced together into a full narrative, experts began to understand just how sophisticated the incident had been and how difficult it had truly been to trace its path with older paradigms. What emerged wasn't simply a tale of one aircraft lost at sea, but an indictment of systemic blind spots, technological, procedural, and psychological, that spanned continents and governments. One of the earliest revelations from the recovered flight data was how easily certain systems could be disabled or manipulated by someone with intimate technical knowledge. This understanding sparked a global reevaluation of aircraft architecture, particularly concerning system redundancy and access controls. For years, airlines had relied on traditional compartmentalized designs, separating flight navigation systems, communication suites, and passenger management. But what the MH370 data showed was that such segregation, while meant to prevent cascading failures, could also be exploited in ways regulators hadn't anticipated. The notion that one individual could reprogram waypoints, sever communications, and pilot a commercial jet for hours outside normal air traffic control channels stunned many in the industry. This insight led to intense scrutiny of how cockpits are designed and how their digital interfaces could be made both more secure and more transparent. Flight management systems, once guarded as proprietary by aircraft manufacturers, were now being opened up for review by third-party auditors, cybersecurity firms, and even international regulatory bodies. There was a growing consensus that flight control systems needed a fail-safe mechanism, an unalterable data stream, accessible in real time by ground controllers, that could alert authorities if any irregularities emerged. Such a system would have been unthinkable a decade earlier due to cost, bandwidth, and privacy concerns. But with the truth of MH370 finally laid bare, those concerns were eclipsed by a greater one, preventing a recurrence. The psychological elements of the mystery also prompted deep and often uncomfortable reflections within the airline industry. The actions revealed by the black box data pointed strongly to intentional human intervention, a scenario that forced institutions to face long-standing weaknesses in the monitoring of pilot mental health. For years, airline crews had undergone periodic psychological evaluations, but these were often minimal and not tailored to the realities of long-haul stress, isolation, or personal trauma. Following the final MH370 findings, there was a paradigm shift. Mental health was no longer considered a secondary wellness issue, but a critical component of flight safety. This triggered a movement toward proactive psychological support, where pilots would undergo regular confidential counseling and have access to anonymous reporting tools for stress, depression, or unusual behavior among peers. Furthermore, the long-standing taboo against discussing mental health in aviation culture began to dissolve. Institutions that once feared legal ramifications or reputational damage from such discussions began openly embracing transparency, recognizing that the cost of silence was far higher. Parallel to these human factors were the geopolitical repercussions. The MH370 case had always hovered in the tense spaces between national interests, with governments reluctant to fully share radar data, satellite telemetry, or military surveillance records. But the final, conclusive findings were the result of unprecedented international openness, a collaborative framework that fused data streams from private satellite firms, state intelligence agencies, oceanographic institutes, and independent researchers. This model of radical cooperation began to influence other global crises, particularly in areas where public safety intersected with national security. Shared aerospace databases were now being piloted, allowing countries to contribute anonymized but valuable traffic data to prevent similar disappearances. Furthermore, the successful recovery effort created diplomatic goodwill between historically strained governments, especially those bordering the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. It became clear that data sharing, once seen as a liability, could be wielded as a form of soft power and global leadership. The commercial airline industry also had to grapple with consumer trust. For years, MH370 had lingered in public consciousness as the epitome of aviation uncertainty. An event so statistically rare and shrouded in confusion that it bred fear among travelers. The conclusion of the investigation allowed airlines to finally begin repairing this fracture. Transparent messaging, detailed safety briefings, and visible improvements in tracking technology were now seen on every long-haul route. Passengers were shown how aircraft could now be tracked even over deep oceanic areas, how satellite uplinks monitored deviations, and how dual authentication was required for major cockpit decisions. There was even a renewed investment in onboard systems that could transmit critical flight data in bursts, eliminating the reliance on physically retrieving black boxes. Known as streaming FDR flight data recorder systems, these had existed in theory and partial deployment for years, but MH370's recovery fast-tracked their global adoption. Within months, leading manufacturers announced that all new aircraft would include real-time data transmission features as standard. Retrofitting began immediately on existing fleets, and aviation regulators moved swiftly to make such updates mandatory. Beyond the aviation world, MH370's final chapter became a symbol for the potency of long-term problem-solving. In a culture often driven by immediate answers and short-term solutions, this discovery proved that some challenges required endurance, evolving strategies, and multi-generational collaboration. Scientists who had first joined the search in their 20s were now seasoned experts, finally seeing closure. Young students inspired by the mystery in 2014 had become the engineers who solved it in 2025. The continuity of inquiry, of refusing to abandon the unsolved, became one of the enduring legacies of the mission. Media portrayals of the discovery also evolved. Earlier dramatizations of MH370 often focused on the spectacle or mystery, sometimes drifting into sensationalism. Now, the emphasis shifted toward the emotional human core. Documentaries, novels, and educational programs explored the real-time decision-making, the impact on families, and the evolving technologies that led to success. These stories highlighted the balance between fact and feeling, between scientific rigor and the raw human need to know what happened to a loved one. One of the more surprising sectors affected by the MH370 resolution was space technology. Satellite companies that had participated in the search effort found new applications for their technologies, including improved Earth observation models and debris tracking for other domains. The cross-disciplinary innovations developed during the search, machine learning applied to chaotic data, thermal imaging through clouded atmospheres, ultra-precise ocean current modeling, now had uses in climate research, disaster recovery, and even asteroid detection. The legal implications also began to unfold. With the full narrative now available, liability claims that had been in limbo for years moved forward. Families were finally able to process insurance payouts, compensation packages, and settlements that had been delayed due to lack of conclusive evidence. More importantly, precedent was established for how governments and corporations handle similar cases in the future. Transparency clauses, data sharing agreements, and victim support frameworks were strengthened, ensuring faster responses and less bureaucratic paralysis in future incidents. As the world looked back on the 11-year journey to uncover MH370's fate, the event stood not just as a resolution, but as a monument to the persistence of inquiry. It represented the kind of problem that refused to be rushed, that resisted easy explanations, and that demanded a slow, methodical, multidisciplinary approach. In an era obsessed with instant feedback, the MH370 investigation proved the power of long arcs of investigation, the idea that some answers are worth waiting for. Cultural reactions also flowed in unexpected directions. In parts of Asia, ceremonies were held in memory of the victims. Blending religious observance with new rituals of closure, artists and musicians began to interpret the story in their own mediums, creating installations, songs, and theater pieces that honored not just the event, but the relentless quest for understanding. The plane itself, or what remained of it, became a kind of artifact. Some pieces of the fuselage were pledged to museums of science and history, not as morbid reminders, but as symbols of technological evolution and international collaboration. In time, the resolution of Flight MH370 may come to be seen not as a single event, but as the conclusion to an era, one where aircraft could still vanish, where oceans remained uncharted, where silence could stretch across years. The aftermath of its discovery didn't just explain what happened, it transformed how humanity prepares for what might happen next. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on MH370's mystery finally being solved in 2025? What do you expect? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.